when we talk about the Kashtira format in Master Duel, there are really 6 decks that we need to worry about. We've got Kashtira's, Purli, Labyrinth, Sorcerer, Despia, and Dragon Link. And we're gonna rank all hand traps based on how good they are versus those decks. Quick message, if you would like to see a staple tier list just like this one, let me know in the comments below. I would love to make one as well. Starting out with Ghost Mourner, I think this is a meh. I don't think it's that great really. Gold Sister, also not that great. No thank you, this card's basically useless. I don't think this card is any good at all. Same goes for the Meister. This card is absolutely unnecessary to play. Token Collector, same thing. You don't really need Token Collector. Sorcerer is barely a tier 3 deck now. And now let's start with Nibiru. So I think that Nibiru is actually sometimes S tier and sometimes A tier. Now I'm gonna put it at A tier and here's why. Obviously versus some decks Nibiru can be absolutely game breaking and you can win games with it, but if people start playing around this card, it actually gets a lot worse because it becomes a brick in your hand. You can easily counter Kashtira with it. You can counter a lot of other decks like the Dragon Link deck, and Purli also is counterable, Despia, Sorcerer, all that stuff. And with Nibiru there's an ongoing cycle all the time. People don't play around it, you start playing it. People play around it, you stop playing it, and all that stuff just goes back and forth. For that reason I think it's A tier, because if people start playing around this card it is gonna be quite worse. But for now people don't actually play around Nibiru that much, which makes it an S tier for now. But when people start playing it, it will probably get a little bit worse, so I'm gonna put it at A tier. Now next up is Ash Blossom, and I think this is an A tier hand trap. So listen, this card is absolutely amazing, okay? It can counter almost every deck and it's a great interruption, great card to put in your deck. Although it's an incredibly good hand trap, it is still not enough to stop most decks. For that reason I think that A tier is enough. Moving on to Effect Viewer, I think this is a B tier hand trap. The two downsides with this one is that first of all you can counter it with Code Buy and also Cross Out, but the second and bigger one is that you cannot activate it during your turn, unlike Imperm for example, which makes it a lot worse in my opinion. It is still a good option, but you know, it's not the best thing to prioritize. And now next up is Ghost Reaper, and I actually believe that this card is probably gonna be A tier, and this is something that maybe a lot of people will flame me in the comments down below for saying this, but I believe that this is one of the best hand traps you can play. If your deck has the space to play this card and also has a couple of extra deck space, you can get rid of something like Baronet de Fleur, the Chaos Ruler for Dragon Link. You can also get rid of the Kashtira Rise card, which is amazing, the Noir from the extra deck of Purlis, and you can counter a lot of boss monsters if you have the extra deck space for this one. I think that people really sleep on this card. This is actually a pretty underrated card. I would definitely put it in my deck. You know, maybe not 3 copies of, but at least as a 1 of or 2 of, something like that. It won't be bad if you have the space to fit it in. Next up is Ghost Ogre, and I think this is a solid B tier. I don't think it's up to A tier because a lot of the times this card doesn't stop the decks, you know, doesn't stop Kashtira, doesn't stop Purli really, but it can definitely provide a really cool interruption. So I wouldn't suggest you necessarily play it, but you can try it out for yourself, see how it goes. I wouldn't fit it in my deck unless I have like a lot of spots for hand traps or something like that. Next up is Ghost Belle, and I think this is a meh. Versus some decks it could be decent, but a lot of the decks just don't really care about it too much. And with Kashtira's not even using their graveyard for the most part outside of activating Birth or something like that, I just don't see this card being that useful in the meta right now. And the first S tier is Imperm. I think this card is absolutely insane versus a lot of decks, and versus Kashtira is actually really good because you can negate the Unicorn and they don't have the space to summon another body unless they have a Rise card or the Kashtira Scarecrow or the Kashtira Tier Limits, which is a pretty good way to negate the deck, and there's also plenty of other things you can negate with it, which makes it even better. By the way, Ash Blossom versus something like Labyrinth is actually probably S tier because it's just ridiculously good against Labyrinth, you know, but overall I think this is A tier because it doesn't really stop the decks from playing the game too much. And next up we've got Lancea, and I think this is probably a solid B tier or maybe even meh. I think that this is not a bad hand trap versus Kashtira's, but outside of Kashtira's and maybe branded at some cases, it really doesn't counter anything else. But clearly versus Kashtira this is a great way to interrupt them. And next up we've got the Diddy Crow, and in my opinion this is just not needed at all. Or maybe it's somewhat decent versus some decks, but I don't think it's that great, okay? I never actually played Diddy Crow in this format and I wouldn't suggest you play it. I also don't see it, so I would say that this is a no thank you. And next up we've got Maxx C. Obviously this is an S tier card. It's just really good. Being able to draw a bunch of cards is always great. We don't need to discuss more about it. Now moving on to the Droll and Lockbird. Now this is an interesting one because I think that versus some decks it can even be A tier, and I'm gonna take a wild guess and say that this is probably gonna be like A tier or maybe high B tier or something like that. It can definitely counter a lot of different decks, and versus Purli it is actually not a bad hand trap as well. So in my opinion this is either low A or high B. I'm gonna leave it on top of B for now, but consider this a great hand trap to play. And next up we've got another interesting one, and this is the PSY-Framegear Gamma. Now Gamma has its upsides, being able to negate something and also destroy it, and also it is very hard to negate it. You can only really negate it with the cross out and only if you have Gamma in your deck. It is a little bit annoying that you need to play a brick in your deck to play this card. You also cannot activate it if you control other monsters, but the effect is actually in my opinion A tier, probably even S tier. It's just ridiculously good as an effect. effect, but with the downsides, I would say that this is about A tier, low A tier, high B tier again. If the deck doesn't have access to a lot of extenders, for example, this card is just insane because it negates and also pops, but versus Kashtira, you can negate the unicorn, but unlike Imperm, it actually pops it, so they can space summon another monster if they have in hand, and there is a pretty big chance for that. So I would say that this is about low A tier, maybe even high B tier, but we're gonna leave it here for now. And next up is the Chaos Hunter. Now, I hate this card. I don't know why people even play this. To me, this is absolutely terrible. It is just a free level 7 body. I just cannot give it anything but no thank you. I have never played with this card. I never liked that card, so yeah, I don't think this is relevant enough. Now, moving on to Bystials, I think this is a solid B tier. Of course, versus decks that play with their graveyard a lot, this card is absolutely amazing. The Branded Beast is also great as a removal. The Druid Swarm is also cool as well. But versus decks like Kashtira and Poorly, I don't think that these interruptions are gonna be enough. And we can argue whether or not this card is A tier or B tier, but let's just say it's B tier and leave it like that. And for the final one, it is the D-Shifter. Clearly, this card is amazing, you know, it is probably like A tier, but versus Kashtira, it's really just irrelevant. It's really good against Dragon Link, it's decently good against Poorly, it is pretty good against Sword Soul as well, but I think that this is probably like an A tier, and depending on exactly how much people play Kashtiras, this card can become either worse or even better if people start playing something like Labyrinth a lot, because this card stops Labyrinth a lot and is definitely hurting Labyrinth players as well. Although for Labyrinth, I don't think that this is game changing necessarily, because they can just wait the D-Shifter and continue playing, you know, it's a control deck, they can definitely survive for a turn or two. But overall, that was it for the tier list. Now let me know in the comments below what you think about this tier list, whether or not you agree with it, whether or not you have other changes, and you can ask me for any other hand trap if I have forgotten anything here. If that video was helpful to you, I would appreciate a like and subscribe, and good luck on the Duelist Cup, duelists.